Pay attention to the woman in the grainy footage, the one walking down the beige hallway of the Northwood Creek apartment complex. Her name is Jenna Mays. The timestamp in the top left corner of the screen reads 8:14 p.m., Tuesday, October 27th. She shifts a grocery bag from her right hip to her left, the plastic crinkling silently on the security feed. She looks tired. It was a long shift at the hospital, the kind of day that settles deep in the bones. As she passes the elevator bank, she does something she has done every single night for the past 6 months. She looks directly into the small black dome of the CCTV camera mounted on the ceiling. She smiles. It's a small, weary smile, but it's genuine. It's a little ritual, a private acknowledgement of the unseen eyes that watch over her new home. A small bit of performance to break the monotony of the hallway. A door down the hall opens. A man steps out. He's holding a small toolbox. This is Mark Stroud, her neighbor from 4B. He smiles, a friendly, familiar gesture. She returns it. They exchange a few words, too distant for the camera's microphone to capture. He gestures with the toolbox towards his apartment. She nods, then follows him. Jenna Mays has less than 30 minutes to live. This is not just the story of a senseless murder. This is the story of a ritual, a pattern, and the one day the pattern was broken. It is a story about the terrifying weaponization of normalcy, and how the monster you should fear most is not the stranger in the shadows, but the friendly neighbor who offers to help. To understand what happened in that hallway, you first have to understand Jenna Mays. She was not just a face on a security camera. Jenna was, by every account, a source of light. At 28 years old, she worked as a pediatric oncology nurse, a job that required a reservoir of compassion most people could never fathom. She spent her days with children fighting unimaginable battles, and she did it with a grace and humor that made her a favorite among patients and colleagues alike. Her mother, Susan, would later describe her as someone who collected people. Jenna didn't just have friends. She had a sprawling, interconnected web of souls she had touched. Old high school friends, college roommates, fellow nurses, even the parents of children she had cared for years ago. Her phone was a constant buzz of group chats, inside jokes, and plans for the future. She had moved into the Northwood Creek apartments just over 6 months ago. The move was precipitated by a painful breakup with a long-term boyfriend, and the small one-bedroom unit was meant to be her sanctuary. A fresh start, a place to reclaim her own space and her own life. It was a typical suburban apartment complex, beige siding, manicured lawns, and a sense of anonymous safety. It was affordable, clean, and close to the hospital. It was perfect. Her sister Chloe helped her move in. They'd spent a weekend painting the walls a soft seafoam green and assembling IKEA furniture. Chloe remembered Jenna being excited, almost giddy, about having a place that was entirely her own. She'd bought a new coffee maker, a ridiculously fluffy bath mat, and a set of wine glasses for future girls' nights. She was building a nest, Chloe would tell investigators, her voice thick with unshed tears. She was so proud of it. Jenna was meticulously organized and a creature of habit. Her nursing career had instilled in her a deep appreciation for routine and order. Her scrubs were always pressed, her lunch was always packed the night before, and her car keys were always in the small ceramic bowl by the door. This love of routine extended to her new home. She discovered the security camera in her hallway on the first night. Feeling a little lonely and a little vulnerable in the new, empty apartment, she'd given it a small, silly wave as she walked past. It felt like acknowledging a silent guardian. The next night, she did it again. And the next. It became a habit, a small, secret ritual that bookended her long days. A tired smile on the way in, a quick wave on the way out. It was a communication with no one and everyone. A quiet declaration, I am here, I am safe. Her life was a tapestry of these small, comforting rituals. Tuesday was yoga night. Friday was for takeout and a movie. The first Saturday of every month was brunch with her mother and sister. These were the anchors in the sometimes stormy sea of her job. But she was also trying to build a new community. She was determined not to let her new apartment become an island. She introduced herself to her neighbors, baked cookies for the elderly woman in 3A, and always had a kind word for the maintenance staff. One of the first people she met was Mark Stroud. He lived just 2 doors down. He was the one who helped her when she locked herself out in her first week, jimmying the lock with a credit card and a surprising amount of skill. He seemed to be the building's unofficial handyman and social connector. On paper, Mark Stroud was the perfect neighbor. He was 42 years old, single, and had lived at Northwood Creek for almost a decade. He worked a quiet job in IT for a local insurance company. He was known for his mild-mannered disposition and his willingness to help anyone. If you had a leaky faucet, a dead car battery, or a package that needed signing for, Mark was your man. Residents described him as quiet, polite, and unfailingly helpful. He kept to himself, but was always pleasant. He remembered people's names, asked about their kids, and watered their plants when they were on vacation. He was utterly, reliably normal. He was the kind of person you feel safe living next to. The kind of person who fades into the background of daily life, a benign fixture in the community. He was invisible, and he used that invisibility as a shield. But beneath that surface of placid helpfulness, a different Mark Stroud existed. A man of intense, methodical obsession. A man who watched and waited and documented. This other Mark Stroud was revealed not by his actions in the real world, but by the digital and physical archives he meticulously maintained in the sterile quiet of apartment 4B. When investigators finally gained access to that apartment, they did not find a scene of chaotic evil. They found something far more chilling. They found order. On his computer, they discovered a folder, password protected and deeply encrypted. Inside were subfolders, each labeled with a woman's name. There were 7 names in total, women who had lived in the building over the past 10 years. The last and most detailed folder was labeled Jenna. Inside Jenna's folder were hundreds of files. There were screenshots from her social media profiles, saved before she made them private. There were candid photos, taken with a long lens camera from his window, of her getting out of her car in the parking lot. There were audio files, secretly recorded snippets of conversations he'd had with her in the hallway. But the most disturbing files were the logs. Mark Stroud kept a daily journal, a simple text file documenting every single time he saw her. 7:12 a.m. Subject departed for work, wearing blue scrubs, hair in a ponytail. 6:45 p.m. Subject returned, carried 2 bags from Trader Joe's, appeared tired. 8:20 p.m. Subject's television is on, light visible under the door. Laughter heard, assume friend is visiting. He logged her routines, her visitors, her clothes, her moods. He noted the arrival of her sister's car, the pizza delivery boy, the man she went on a single, awkward date with 2 months prior. He was building a database of her life, piece by painstaking piece. And then there was the physical evidence. In a locked footlocker under his bed, police found what they would later call his trophies. A postcard that had fallen out of her mailbox, which he'd kept instead of returning. A single earring she had lost in the laundry room, which he'd found and polished. A small ceramic bird that had been part of a wind chime on her balcony before it mysteriously broke and disappeared. He was a collector, a curator of a museum dedicated to her. The journals also revealed the escalation of his fantasy. In the beginning, the entries were observational, almost scientific. But as the months went on, a possessive, frustrated tone began to creep in. He wrote about his right to her attention. He was angry when she went out with friends instead of staying home. He interpreted her friendly smiles in the hallway as private, intimate signals meant only for him. Her nightly smile at the camera became a focal point of his obsession. He had illegally accessed the building's CCTV server, a simple task for someone with his IT background. He didn't just see the footage, he downloaded it. Every night. He had a collection of 183 video files, one for each day she had lived there. Each one showing her tired, happy, or distracted smile. He wrote about it in his journal. She smiles for me. She knows I'm watching. It's our secret. To him, her ritual was not a private moment. It was a performance for an audience of one. The friendliness she showed to everyone was, in his mind, a special bond they shared. Her kindness was not a personality trait. It was a promise. And when he felt that imagined promise was threatened, his thoughts turned dark. A week before the murder, he noted that she had been spending more time on the phone, laughing. He saw her talking to a male doctor from her hospital in the parking lot. His journal entry from that night was chillingly clear. She is slipping away. She is forgetting her place. I need to make it permanent. I need to bring her home, where I can keep her safe. He began to plan. His online search history showed queries for how to soundproof a room, best cleaning products for blood, and average police response time for a missing person. He was not a man who snapped. He was a man who scheduled. October 27th was day 184. For Jenna, it was just another Tuesday. A grueling 12-hour shift where she'd comforted a terrified 6-year-old through a painful procedure and held the hand of a teenager who had just received devastating news. She was emotionally and physically drained. On her way home, she called her mother, Susan. It was a brief, normal conversation. She complained about traffic, talked about her plans to visit that weekend, and promised to call again the next day. "I love you," were the last words Susan ever heard from her daughter. Jenna stopped for groceries, picking up ingredients for a simple pasta dinner. She was looking forward to a quiet night, a hot shower, and an early bedtime. For Mark, October 27th was the culmination of 6 months of escalating obsession. He left work early, complaining of a migraine. He spent the afternoon preparing. He laid down plastic sheeting in his spare bedroom. He cleared a space in his large, industrial-grade freezer. He packed a duffel bag with a change of clothes, bleach, heavy-duty trash bags, and a shovel. He placed the bag in the trunk of his car. He assembled his small toolbox, the one he always carried when doing his neighborly deeds. But this time it contained only 3 items: a roll of duct tape, a set of zip ties, and a heavy hammer. He then sat in his armchair, the one facing his front door, and watched the live feed of the hallway camera on his tablet. He waited. At 8:14 p.m., he saw her, his subject. She was home. He watched as she walked down the hall, her movements familiar to him. He watched as she looked up at the camera and gave her tired, beautiful smile. His smile. His pulse quickened. It was time. He stood, picked up the toolbox, and opened his door just as she was approaching. The timing was perfect, as he knew it would be. "Jenna, hey," he said, his voice calm and friendly. "Bad timing, but could you give me a hand for just a second? My pilot light went out again, and I can't quite reach the reset switch. You've got smaller hands. You'd be a lifesaver." It was the perfect lure. It played on her inherent kindness and his established role as the slightly hapless but helpful neighbor. It was a request she couldn't, and wouldn't, refuse. "Oh, sure, Mark." "No problem," she said, shifting her groceries. The security camera recorded her nod. It recorded her following him toward his open doorway. It recorded the moment she stepped across the threshold of apartment 4B. And then she was gone from its view. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, the facade dropped. Mark's friendly expression vanished, replaced by a cold, flat emptiness. Jenna, sensing the sudden shift in atmosphere, took a half-step back. "So, where's the—" she started to ask, but never finished. The first blow from the hammer was to the back of her head. It was sudden, brutal, and utterly unexpected. She collapsed to the floor without a sound. What followed was a frenzy of violence that stood in stark, horrifying contrast to the perpetrator's methodical planning. The autopsy would later reveal the extent of the attack, a level of rage that spoke to months of pent-up frustration and entitlement. After the act, the meticulous planner returned. He worked with a chilling efficiency honed by weeks of mental rehearsal. He used the zip ties and duct tape as he had planned. He wrapped her body in the plastic sheeting he had prepared. There was very little blood, a fact he noted with grim satisfaction in a journal entry he would write later that night. He took her keys and her purse. He walked back to her apartment, 4D, and let himself in. The space she had so lovingly created, her nest, was now a problem to be managed. He took the small ceramic bird from her bookshelf, the one that matched the broken piece he already had. A final trophy. He looked around, ensuring nothing seemed out of place from the outside. He then left, locking the door behind him. He placed her purse and keys in the bottom of a grocery bag he'd filled with his own trash. He would dispose of it in a random dumpster on his way to work the next morning. At approximately 10:30 p.m., 2 hours after she entered his apartment, Mark Stroud carried Jenna's body, wrapped and sealed, out the back service entrance of the building, an entrance with no security cameras. He placed her in the trunk of his car, next to the duffel bag. He drove for an hour to a remote wooded state park he frequented for hiking. There, in the cold, dark soil, he buried her. He returned to his apartment just before 2 a.m. Then he began to clean. He was as meticulous in his cleanup as he had been in his planning. He used bleach and specialized cleaning agents. He pulled up a section of the floorboards where a small amount of blood had seeped through, replacing it with a spare piece he had kept in a closet. He showered, scrubbing his skin raw. At 4 a.m., he sat down at his computer. He opened his journal. The entry for day 184 was short. Subject came home. She is permanent now. Safe. Then he opened the CCTV folder. He looked at the file for day 184. He watched her walk down the hall. He watched her smile. He watched her walk into his apartment. He dragged the file to the trash. The pattern was now broken. The alarm was first raised on Wednesday morning. Jenna didn't show up for her 7 a.m. shift. This was unheard of. Jenna was never late, and she would certainly never be a no-show. Her charge nurse called her cell phone repeatedly. It went straight to voicemail. By 9 a.m., the hospital had called her mother, Susan. Panic began to set in. Susan and Chloe drove to the Northwood Creek apartments immediately. They found Jenna's car in its usual spot. They banged on her door. No answer. Everything looked normal. Too normal. They called the police to request a wellness check. An officer arrived, knocked on the door, and peered in the windows. He saw nothing amiss. He spoke to the building manager, who said he hadn't seen her. The officer's report was dismissive. Subject is a 28-year-old female. No signs of forced entry or foul play. May have left with a friend. Advised family to wait 24 hours before filing a missing person report. But Susan Mays knew her daughter. She knew Jenna's routines. Something was terribly wrong. Waiting wasn't an option, she later said. A mother knows. Refusing to be placated by bureaucracy, Susan and Chloe became the investigators. They called every one of Jenna's friends. No one had heard from her since Tuesday afternoon. They logged into her social media accounts, which she had shared with Chloe. No new activity. It was Chloe who remembered the security cameras. They demanded the building manager show them the footage from the hallway. At first, he was reluctant, citing privacy policies. But Susan's fierce maternal terror was more powerful than any corporate policy. He relented, pulling up the feed from Tuesday night on his office computer. They watched the screen, their hearts pounding. And there she was, Jenna, walking down the hall, tired but safe. "Look, she's smiling," Chloe whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. "She always does that. She told me it was her little joke." Then they saw Mark Stroud. They saw the brief conversation. They saw Jenna nod and follow him into his apartment. They kept watching. For 1 hour, then 2, then 3. She never came out. They rewound the tape and watched it again. Jenna goes in. The door closes. The door does not open again until the next morning, when Mark Stroud leaves for work, carrying a bag of trash. "Where is she?" Susan breathed, her voice a ghost. That was the breakthrough. That was the moment a wellness check became a criminal investigation. Armed with the family's discovery, the police could no longer dismiss the case. 2 detectives were dispatched to Northwood Creek. They knocked on Mark Stroud's door that evening, just as he was sitting down to dinner. He was the picture of concerned cooperation. "Jenna?" "Oh yeah, she helped me with my water heater last night," he told them, his expression open and earnest. "She was only in here for a minute. Then she said she was in a hurry, meeting a friend for a late dinner. Said her name was Jessica, I think." She seemed excited. It was a clever lie. It provided a reason for her to have been in his apartment and a reason for her disappearance. He had created a plausible, alternative narrative, but he made a critical mistake. He underestimated Susan Mays. When the detectives relayed his story, Susan was adamant. Jenna didn't have a close friend named Jessica, and she would never, ever blow off her shift for a last-minute dinner. He's lying. The detectives, now suspicious, pressed Mark. They asked to look inside his apartment. He readily agreed, confident in his cleanup. They saw nothing out of the ordinary. The apartment was immaculately clean, almost sterile, but his story had a crack in it, and the detectives began to chisel away. They brought him to the station for a formal interview. The interrogation lasted for 6 hours. For the first 4, Mark was a rock. He was calm, consistent, and helpful. He repeated his story about Jessica without deviation. He expressed concern for Jenna's well-being. Detectives used a classic technique. They didn't challenge his story directly. They let him build it, adding details, making it more concrete in his own mind. Then they showed him the footage. They played the clip of Jenna entering his apartment. "Okay, Mark, that's 8:15 p.m., the lead detective said. "Now show us where she comes out." They fast-forwarded the video. An hour passed on the screen, then 2. Mark's composure began to fray. Maybe I got the time wrong. Maybe she left later," he stammered. "We've watched the whole night, Mark. The door doesn't open. Where is she?" His story began to crumble. He changed details. Maybe she left out the back. No. Maybe he walked her down and he just didn't remember. The lies became tangled, desperate. The final blow was a simple question. "Mark, what did you do with her keys?" He had no answer. He had been so focused on the big picture, the body, the car, the apartment, that he had overlooked a small detail. If she had left to meet a friend, she would have taken her keys and her purse. Faced with the irrefutable logic of the video and the flaw in his own narrative, he broke. But he didn't confess to murder. He confessed to an accident. She tripped, he claimed, tears now streaming down his face. She fell and hit her head on the corner of my coffee table. There was so much blood. I panicked. I didn't know what to do. I thought everyone would blame me. It was another calculated lie, a desperate attempt to mitigate the consequences. An accident, not a murder. Manslaughter, not a life sentence. But with his confession to disposing of the body, they had what they needed. A search warrant for Mark Stroud's apartment, car, and computer was executed at 3 a.m. And the full, horrifying scope of his obsession finally came to light. The search of apartment 4B was a descent into a disturbed mind. While the main living area was sterile, the forensic team, armed with luminol, found what Mark's cleaning had missed. Under the newly replaced floorboard, a faint chemical glow revealed the residue of blood. DNA tests would later confirm it was Jenner's. In his bedroom, they found the locked footlocker. Inside was the chilling collection of trophies, the postcard, the single earring, and, most damningly, the small ceramic bird from her bookshelf. A bird her sister Chloe would identify instantly, weeping. The discovery of his computer and the encrypted journals was the turning point. Detectives spent days with IT specialists breaking the encryption. What they found was a prosecutor's dream and a family's worst nightmare. A detailed 6-month chronicle of stalking and fantasy, culminating in a clear plan for her abduction and murder. The lie about the accident was shattered by his own words. The GPS data from his car's infotainment system provided the final piece of the puzzle. It showed a trip late Tuesday night to a specific remote location in the Tuscarora State Forest. A team of investigators, led by cadaver dogs, was dispatched to the coordinates. After a grim, 2-hour search, they found a patch of recently disturbed earth. They found Jenner. The condition of her remains told a story of profound disrespect, but it was the county medical examiner's report that delivered the final clinical truth. Dr. Alistair Finch's findings were unequivocal. The cause of death was not a single, accidental blow to the head from a fall. It was multiple instances of extreme blunt force trauma, inconsistent with any accidental scenario. There were defensive wounds on her hands and arms, evidence that Jenner, a fighter to the very end, had struggled for her life. The autopsy proved that Mark Stroud's story of a tragic accident was a self-serving fiction. He was not a man who had panicked. He was a predator who had attacked. The trial of Mark Stroud began 11 months later. The courtroom was packed every day. Jenner's family and friends sat in the front row, a silent, grieving wall of support. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Helen Cho, built their case methodically, brick by damning brick. They started with the CCTV footage, playing the final haunting video for the jury. They showed Jenner's smile, then they showed her disappearing into Mark's apartment, never to emerge. They presented the evidence from the search, the journals detailing the obsession, the trophies stolen from Jenner's life, the forensic link of her blood in his apartment. Jenner's mother, Susan, took the stand. In a quiet, steady voice, she told the jury about her daughter's life, her compassion, her job, her love of routine. She described their final phone call, and she told them about the CCTV ritual, the nightly smile that had become the key to finding her daughter's killer. The defense had an impossible task. They abandoned the accident story as the forensic evidence made it untenable. Instead, they attempted to paint Mark as a profoundly lonely and mentally ill man, incapable of forming the necessary intent for first-degree murder. They argued his journals were fantasy, not a plan. But the prosecution dismantled this argument with Mark's own meticulousness. His search history for cleaning supplies and soundproofing. His purchase of the shovel 2 weeks before the murder. His deactivation of his work security badge for the afternoon of the crime. This was not fantasy. This was a project plan. The most powerful testimony came from a forensic psychologist who analyzed Mark's journals. She explained the concept of obsessive fixation and the process of dehumanization. To the defendant, she testified, Jenna Mays was no longer a person. She was an object to be possessed. Her smile, her kindness, her very existence were interpreted through the lens of his fantasy. When her real life, her friends, her potential new relationships threatened that fantasy, he didn't see it as rejection. He saw it as a malfunction of his possession. So he decided to fix it by making her a permanent part of his collection. After a 3-week trial, the jury took less than 4 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty of first-degree murder, of kidnapping, of abuse of a corpse. A wave of quiet sobs and relieved gasps swept through the gallery. Susan Mays collapsed into her daughter Chloe's arms. Mark Stroud, a man who had performed so many emotions, concern, friendship, remorse, showed none. He stared straight ahead, his face a blank mask, as the verdict was read. At the sentencing, he was given life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case of Jenna Mays is over, but the echoes of her story remain. The Northwood Creek apartment complex, faced with a lawsuit from the Mays family, overhauled its security protocols. They updated their CCTV system, instituted mandatory background checks for all residents, and fired the manager who had initially tried to block access to the tapes. Jenna's family started a foundation in her name, Jenna's Light, which provides scholarships for nursing students and advocates for stronger anti-stalking legislation. They fight to ensure that her legacy is not one of a victim, but one of change. This case serves as a horrifying cautionary tale. It is a reminder that evil does not always announce itself with a roar. Sometimes it knocks on your door with a toolbox and a friendly smile. Mark Stroud was a monster hiding in the most effective camouflage known to man: normalcy. He used his reputation for helpfulness as a stalking horse for his obsession. Every kind act was a reconnaissance mission. Every polite conversation was data collection. He preyed on the very best of human nature. He exploited Jenna's kindness, her openness, her willingness to help a neighbor. Her goodness was the key he used to unlock her door. And so, what you must take away from this is a difficult but necessary lesson. Pay attention to patterns, not just the sinister ones, but the benevolent ones too. Be aware of those who seem overly interested in your routine, whose helpfulness feels just a little too focused, a little too present. Trust that feeling in your gut, the one that tells you something is slightly off, even when you can't logically explain it. Document it. Tell a friend. Create a record. Your intuition is a primal security system. Do not ignore its warnings. We teach children about stranger danger, but we rarely teach adults about neighbor danger. The assumption of safety in our own homes, our own hallways, is a powerful vulnerability. Jenna Mays was not careless. She was not naive. She was a kind, compassionate woman who was targeted by a predator who had spent months studying her. She smiled at a camera every night, a small act of defiant joy in a monotonous world. On day 184, she didn't. And that break in the pattern, discovered by a family who refused to give up, is the only reason we know the truth today. Remember her life, not just her death. Remember the nurse, the sister, the daughter, the friend. And remember that the line between a friendly neighbor and a deadly obsession can be as thin as a locked door.